1269th day of the war. The composition of the delegation for the Putin-Trump summit in Alaska became known, and he is some kind of unfit heavyweight. On both sides, at least 2 ministers are presented. True, we only know the composition of the American delegation from the media, so let's wait for the photos. The President of the United States reduces expectations from the summit, as well as says that if the meeting goes bad, then it will fly quite quickly. At the same time, according to him, if everything goes well, then the Putin-Zelensky summit will be organized quite quickly to end the war. The attitude of Trump's statements will jump from one place to another, and it is possible only to hope that the President of the United States will be consistent. Putin's goals remain unchanging to pull Trump in his direction, which is characteristic of the Russian delegation, no Medinsky. This once again emphasizes that he has no connection to any real negotiations he has and cannot have. The consequences of Ukrainian kinetic sanctions in Volgograd are more clear. In Volgograd, the NPZ Lukla stopped working. The refinery on the oil production site Druzhba received serious damage. It seems that the company against the Russian oil industry has gained new strength after a few breaks. Well, last night, an oil refinery was on fire in Syzran, where the eyewitness publishes footage of multiple fires at the refinery. The FSB reported on a mega operation on the outcome of the production of Ukrainian Sapsan missile systems. The fact is, they showed footage of strikes on Ukrainian refineries related to 2023. They didn't believe even in the Z channels, so the response to the Ukrainian spiderweb clearly didn't go out. Or rather, it did go out, but in the best traditions of the Russian army. A lot of statements, little essence, and no connection to reality. These statements do not have. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Ukrainian forces localized the breakthrough, making the Russians lose more than 200 people, killed and wounded, and began a counterattack. The goal is to knock out the enemy back across the river Kazany Torets, eliminating the threat of Debropoli and the logistics going through it. In the meantime, Russian armed forces are trying to bypass the so-called Chasiv Yar from the north and again destroy equipment in mechanized assaults. This time in the Zaporizhzhia direction. In Russia, the police is over. It's not a loud headline. This is what Z-War bloggers discuss in the repost of the video, where the police in response to the call of the girl say that everyone is fired. The situation is not a single one. The Ministry of Defense a total shortage of personnel, and the situation is getting worse and worse, the Z channels themselves tell. This and much more in today's fresh report, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions help. They are important for YouTube algorithms. The subscribe button is here, and subscriptions to channels are not yet forbidden in Russia, and this is not forbidden. Moreover, I am not an extremist at all, at least not yet. No lists have involved me, and extremists or terrorists were recognized. You can support the channel financially on Patreon, the link to which is in the description, and by buying NVPN. This is a tool to bypass blocking, which allows you to use YouTube, well, that is, at a normal speed to watch videos on Twitter, Instagram, and now to call in WhatsApp and call in Telegram, which was blocked by Roskomnadzor. So buy NVPN by the link in the description and get access to the normal internet, including the opportunity to call on people who Russia is trying to prohibit. Well, the purchase of VPNs and the use of VPNs is still not forbidden by Russian laws. If something changes, we will let you know. In the Russian propaganda media, a list of American delegations appeared in negotiations with Russia on Alaska. In addition to President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Mark Rubio, Minister of Finance Scott Bessant and Special Ambassador to Trump, Steve Witkoff, will participate in the negotiations, reports Russia Today, NTV, and Russia One. Such a list of participants can confirm that the meeting will be not only about Ukraine, but also about double-sided cooperation in the economic sector, as well as the cancellation of sanctions. As Russia Today reported, the composition of the American delegation allegedly announced the White House. The assumed list of participants of the negotiations from the U.S. side was brought by NTV and Russia One. In addition, it was mentioned in the comment of the political author Dmitry Dreys on the radio, Commercant FM. The Western media list of likely participants of the summit from the U.S. side is not yet called, so it is not clear which White House they are connected to. The Russian side in the negotiations will take part. In addition to Putin, head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov, assistants of President Yuri Ushakov, Minister of Defense Andriy Belousov, Minister of Finance Anton Silvanov, and the representative of the President for International Economic Cooperation with Foreign Countries Kirill Dmitry. The Russian list was hit by Ushakov, while the Prime Minister does not participate in the negotiations. That is, a person who, if something happens to Putin, will become the head of the state. I do not hint at anything, I just had to say the word. If the information of the Russian media is confirmed, then this will mean that Washington went to the meeting of the desire of Moscow to discuss not only Ukraine. About this, in particular, was said on the morning of Vladimir Putin. During the meeting before the departure, he said about the energy and sincere efforts of the White House not only to the conflict, as he said in Ukraine, but also to create long-term conditions for the world in general, assuming that Washington and Moscow can come to a peace agreement in the field of control. Over the strategic offensive weapons, which make no sense if China does not participate in them, but let's leave it for the scopes. At least that was Trump's position. On Thursday, at the comment of the corresponding summit for the media, Ushakov stated that during the meeting 2 leaders in Alaska will discuss not only Ukraine, but also broader tasks of providing peace and security, as well as relevant and most relevant international and regional matters. There is an expected exchange of opinions regarding the further development of double-way cooperation, including including in the trade and economic sphere, Ushakov said. Before the meeting in the Kremlin, Putin held a meeting with members of the Russian high leadership, as well as with representatives of the government and the president's administration, which, of course, does not add optimism. According to the video published by the press service, Putin stated, "The U.S. administration is making, in my opinion, a quite energy and sincere effort to stop the combat actions, to stop the crisis, and to come to an agreement that is representative of the interest of those involved in this conflict of sides in order to create long-term peace between our countries, in Europe, and in the world in general. If we, the next stage, go to the peace of mind in the field of control over the strategic offensive weapons." The channel Bitely describes your expectations about the meeting as follows. The Wall Street Journal yesterday went out with a promising headline, which the Fox News processed in the release dedicated to the next meeting of Trump and Putin. Trump agreed with Europe about the Ukrainian red lines before the summit with Putin. But there is one thing that does not inspire me at all, writes Bitely, which is the fact that, according to the results of the meeting, there is a joint press conference of Trump and Putin, which was confirmed by Ushakov and the press secretary of the White House, Caroline Levitt. So it won't be just a closed meeting where they chit-chat on the airbase and leave, and Putin will be standing with Trump. Journalists will ask questions, and will have to expect how the American president will melt before the Russian dictator. In addition to the image damage that this meeting will cause to the Western world, Bitely writes, there's another moment. A press conference is held when some joint positions have already been agreed on. No one brings a press conference with a front, and at this point I even fear suspecting that they and Putin could have agreed, especially on Ukraine. In general, tomorrow will be a difficult test in all ways, says Bitely. And I agree with you on the fact that it's going to be a difficult test, and as I told you, the most likely outcome of the meeting is for Donald Trump to start supporting Vladimir Putin again, and so on. But there's a big but. First of all, Donald Trump himself stated that a press conference might be or might not be. Second, it's Donald Trump. So all of the protocol knowledge we have about certain events, their consequences, and what certain things mean should be somewhat zeroed in the context that it's Donald Trump. Because it's Donald Trump, a chaotic, unpredictable, very confident in himself, a person who is very obsessed with himself, who doesn't understand or accept any formalities, refusing to say a word. So based on the fact that things are based on, I wouldn't be so sure that this is a clear sign that something is already agreed on. It seems to me that in the best scenario, Trump will push Vladimir Putin to the point of fire, as you can see, a lot of economists from the Russian side. And this means to me that in principle in the Kremlin they realize the problem of the Russian economy here now. Moreover, Donald Trump has repeatedly emphasized that he knows about the Russian problems in the economy. I hope you are watching our bold economic reports and my video about what the Z channels tell about the Russian economy. Not only the Z channels, but also the economists inside Russia. Yesterday I was told that D-Advisor is not a Z channel. And that's just how it is, true. People often ask me, can they show me? Where de-economists are people who are clearly not economists in emigration, who are more riskier in words in their assessments, and so on. They're people inside and who are basically ready to live inside the fifth authorities. That's why their statements about the economy, their opinion about the economy, are called unsponsored by the M6, Masada, Gazdeb, or whatever they usually add to those who left Russia. That's why I hope Trump got acquainted with the economy. And in this context, of course, the only reason why it's possible to imagine that Vladimir Putin is ready to end the war or to stop it there is his understanding of the deep economic crisis in Russia, which not only the lazy ones are talking about. They are trying to mask it, putting more money in the defense, but it turns out to be getting worse and worse. Well, that is, sphere after sphere, and just dying. Whole industry is dead, the agro sector is dying, the non-war industry is dying, everything in principle, well, that is, kind of, the absolutely systematic crises are coming to an end, which will not go anywhere, even if the war stops. But in the case of its continuation, in the case of additional budgetary costs for this very war, and they are inevitable, as with any war, this means that the situation will kind of deteriorate very much and rapidly, which is what literally everyone is talking about, including Bulina, who says, well, look, if the budget costs will increase, then, like, I have a leg, I can't do anything with it. But so, ending the story about what I agree and agree to, or that yes, of course, there is a threat, yes, we know that Trump is such a flyer a little, and we know that he likes to believe the word. But let's see, it still seems to me that Trump has an accumulated 1.5-month background of a negative attitude towards Vladimir Putin. It seems to me that if Putin again starts telling about the story and other rest nonsense, Trump will not like to suffer from it. It seems to me that Trump is personally offended by Putin because in the representation of Trump, Putin likes him very much. Really, he likes Putin sincerely. He likes dictatorship. He loves this. He would like to do the same with himself. As you can see, he even held a parade recently, trying to imitate what is happening in, let's say, not very democratic regimes, but it turned out so bad because that's the meaning of it. Like if it's dictatorship, you can cause soldiers to march into Nacke, which means doing everything on a very large scale and very beautifully. But if you're democracy and report for every single penny and so on, there are big problems with that. In any case, Trump is very good with Putin, and the fact that Putin has been simply knocking out aid for half a year, which it seems he is dragging on to Putin, in fact, not only to Trump, he is really dragging on to him aid and the opportunity to jump off this in fact, lost for Russia in the war because Russia lost a lot, lost the international influence, lost its economy, lost the Soviet stock of equipment, well, and so on and so forth. They talked about it with you many times. And in general, it seems to me that this displeasure of Trump, it is, in principle, already reinforced in him, but let's see, let's knock on the copy. As you know, yesterday in the chat of drones, they began to talk about it. And what if Putin is really killed or arrested in Alaska? I say, guys, let's not knock on the copy in the day before the meeting. Tomorrow, everything will be known. Here, so I just don't agree that there is some kind of clear alarmist approach that Trump sold everything, betrayed everyone, and so on. Moreover, his last statements are quite pro-European, pro-Ukrainian, well, and quite adequate. But his statements mean nothing, so let's see what happens in the end. Naturally, the most likely option is for Trump to once again rub against Putin's side, but not the only option. The most likely, but not the only one. What follows continues to be, or you know, he writes. I always try to look for optimism, but that's when my expectations aim at the absolute zero. But for the zero to be not absolute, here's the main thing from Wall Street Journal. Let their expectations lose weight, he writes. The American leader told European colleagues he won't hold talks on territory, which would instead focus on an immediate ceasefire. As Macron said, Trump agreed that Ukraine's security guarantees must be provided for the US and Europe together. This is a significant shift from Trump's position on this issue. Vance and Rubio have warned about their readiness to closely cut ties with Europe to provide an honest deal. Especially among European leaders made the impression of Vance, who demonstrated the interest of a joint transatlantic position before the negotiations with Putin on Saturday in England, as well as a detailed understanding of the situation, the participants said. Here's what I really didn't expect from Vance. Although, again, we must remember that Vance is a person who pretends to be a fool. Well, because this person in the 20s, I think, called Trump a fascist, who was an ultra-liberal, and so on. Well, that is, as it were, you understand the problem with the American administration. There are stupid idiots, there are those who pretend to be a stupid idiot. For example, Hex is a stupid idiot, Vance pretends to be a stupid idiot, Tulsi Gabbard is a sadist beyond girl at all. Well, that is, it is like a rattlesnake, or I don't know. Trump apparently does not shoot it only because it continues to supply him with stories like Obama and force, and not only Obama, but in short, Democrats have forced the story about entering Russia into the American elections. And in fact, it was not, she says, that's it. Apparently that's why. So when you have such a combination of moron and people who pretend to be moron, well, it's just monstrous, especially when we talk about the most powerful economic and military country in the world. But the Americans chose it. Well, we chose it. I'm also an American. We failed as a nation. It's not my first time. I failed as a nation for the second time. Trump officials not only add hope for transatlantic unity. Europeans should calm down or shut up. About Trump's peace settlement strategy in Ukraine, said U.S. Secretary of State Besant on Fox. Let me remind you, according to Russian sources, he is part of the negotiating group. They are constantly true, he says. The U.S. should do this, the U.S. should do that. President Trump made a secondary tax on India for buying Russian oil. Europeans have not yet done this. In fact, Europeans are buying oil products manufactured by Indian refineries, said Besant. He noted that if you want to act as a single front, the leaders of Europe should take their stockpiles. Here, I must probably say that Blink Cutsmit America has generally separated itself from everything, but you know, I generally agree with him, right? We all complain to Comrade Trump, and of course, for the sake of it. But who uses only the 1,000th part of its economic potential? Who has been agreed to the transfer of tanks and the opening of new weapons lines for 100 years, who still buys Russian energy carriers, who can't sort out the small worm Orban, introduce the mechanism of the bypass of the veto of Hungary, who has not been able to agree to the coalition of the desired and specific parameters of its participation for more than a year. All these questions are absolutely legitimate. Europe is the world's most powerful player, economically and population-wise, but it continues to be in a half-anabiosis as the last 30 years, hopefully, for the US. Yes, the situation is improving, but very slowly. But for Europe, the threat of Russia is not the one that is relevant, but the one that is doing damage right here and now. While there are cyber operations and diversification, but a wide military conflict is quite possible. And in this background, Europe's talking too much and doing too little. Again, not everything, there are exceptions, there are different situations and so on, but the basis is when we talk in the general European module. So in all the negative sides of Trump and the current insane American administration, I agree with Besant that Europe should make much more effort than it does now. Politics should already stay silent, guns should sound. Meanwhile, it must be noted that some European countries are making their contribution, not just in words but in reality. In 2025, Ukraine has already received 1 million large-caliber ammunition as part of the Czech initiative. This was reported by the Prime Minister of Czechia, Petr Fiala, reports the military. I can report, he says, that as of today, through the Czech initiative, we have already delivered 1 million units of large-caliber ammunition to Ukraine this year, he wrote. Fiala also noted the coordination of the position with President Donald Trump and welcomed the participation in the meeting of the wishing Vice Presidents of the United States, J.D. Vance, for whom this was the first appearance in this format. The Czech initiative is implemented since April 2024. The program provides for buying shells in 3 countries and their supply to Ukraine. The first party purchased according to this scheme was delivered in June last year. According to the plan previously voiced by the President of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavlov, in 2025, as part of the initiative, it is planned to transfer at least 1.8 million shells to Ukraine. But while Europe transferred shells and while really performs its obligatory, which, in my opinion, are not enough at the moment, not only in mine, the American administration also, we have the opportunity to directly help Ukrainian soldiers, help them their lives in their fight against the Russian fascist occupation army. The most real help here and now is not judging, but on what basis I can give direct help to help them fulfill their goals and, in fact, stop the Russian army. Therefore, I remind you that we continue to collect their appeal to the 3rd Assault Corps. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes, we are the artillery intelligence of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade. We appeal to Michael Sidnaya Nacke with a request to help the Evo Max 4N Autel 2 things, which will help us to initially destroy the enemy in our direction. Glory to the nation, death to the enemy. Here's the QR code for Monobank in the description: private, PayPal, Bitcoin, and USDT TRC20 cryptocurrency wallets. In general, everything is in the description. Thank you very much to everyone who has already participated. I hope that today we will be able to finish this meeting if people are quite active. I took part in this meeting too, as in all other ones. Thank you very much from the military to everyone who helps literally to save the Ukrainian life and helps, in fact, to protect Ukraine from Russian aggression. Well, we are moving on. The Japanese authorities carried out an investigation of the supply of high-precision equipment of the Russian defense industry and identified large-scale violations of sanctions. This was reported by the full president of Ukraine on the matters of sanctions policy, Vladislav Volodymyr. According to the authorities, the Ministry of Economics and Industry of Japan, it has confirmed that more than 300 Tsugami production units have disappeared after the sale of 7 Chinese companies. About 30 of these Tsugami have already been found in Russia. Japan has forced Tsugami to break contracts with the involved intermediaries. The support for the already sold Tsugami units in the Russian defense industry will be suspended, and cooperation with other suspect Chinese partners will also be cancelled. Another investigation related to the company Ferrotech, supplying chemicals and tools. Its director is a Chinese civilian. The investigation confirmed that the Ferrotech product arrived at Russian defense enterprises, in particular in the companies EPL, Micron, Wimpel, and other ones. In April, part of such contracts were suspended. Further supplies were taken to constant monitoring. Earlier, Russian media stated that the Japanese Tsugami received overprofit from the sell-in thanks to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The volume of supply to its equipment in the Russian armed forces skyrocketed more than 20 times since February 2022. It's also known that China supplies Russian equipment and supplies for the production of ammunition at Russian defense industry enterprises. In addition, the Russian-led company less afforded from Czechia are being headed around the sanctions, supplying shortage products to the producers of Russian wingtip and ballistic missiles. So when you hear that the sanctions did not influence Russian production very much, first of all, this is not true. They affected quite greatly. We talked about this with you yesterday. Secondly, in the part where they did not influence, this is just a bypass of sanctions. Therefore, if Western countries and in principle all countries will carefully monitor what is happening and control the sanctions, then Russia will not be able to produce neither missiles nor much else quite quickly, because it itself does not know how to do this. At least it does not know how to make the necessary components for it. Russia lost the Su-30 SM fighter over the Black Sea, the military of the naval forces in the Sumy region reported. In the Ukrainian department, they wrote about the incident as follows. Intelligence funds of the Ministry of Emergency Situations of Ukraine received a radio intercept of the loss of communication with the plane plane of Russian interceptors of the Su-30SM, which carried out the task southeastern of the island of Zmena. The aircraft supposedly fell for unidentified reasons. At the moment, occupiers are doing a search and rescue operation. According to local information, debris of the plane pilots are not yet found on the sea. Z-channel fighter bomber close to the VK of the Russian armed forces confirmed the loss of the plane in its own way, publishing it a black and white photo. This also means that the crew died together with the plane. Well, the ground, or in this case the sea, is covered by a glassy Russian occupant. Massive raid of UAVs was subject to Belgorod. As a result of the UAV hit or its breakdown, a light car burned down. Also, a damage was made to the building of the government of the Belgorod region. Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov reported that the regional center was attacked by 32 UAVs, of which 13 managed to shoot down. A total of 5 people were injured. The damaged people received a mall, apartments, private houses, as well as cars. At the same time, according to the master, as a result of the attack on the building of the Oktyabrsko District Court, the Deputy Chief of Police of the No. 3 Ministry of Defense of the Belgorod region, Colonel of the Police Sergei Mesedov, and Senior Researcher Criminalist of the Belgorod region, the Captain of the Justice Andreas A. Cherbak, about which Gladkov preferred to remain silent. The drone fell on the roof of the multi-story house, supposedly as a result of the influence of electronic warfare means. A possible target of the attack could be the headquarters of the Southern Military District. Governor of the Rostov region, Yuri Slusar, reported on 13 victims and the damage of several multi-story houses. As the pro-Russian telegram channel Svidmiddle reported, a kamikaze drone created on the base of an electric motor plane A-22 Foxbat was involved in the attack. Z-channels expressed confusion as to how such a parade could without obstacles reach the center of Rostov-on-Don. And I will emphasize again, please avoid living next to military objects. Considering that the front cities are covered by them a little more than completely, try to avoid living in them. The Russian air defense is very busy. It guards the residence of Putin on Valdai, where, as you remember, 12 Panzer systems are located at once. Ukrainian drones, according to various sources, hit a refinery in the city of Syzran in the Samara region last night. The Ukrainian telegram channel Nova Plus published 1.5 dozen photos and videos shot supposedly on residents of Syzran, on which local oil refineries are visible from different angles, or 3 fires with large columns of black smoke on it. In a couple of videos, the shooting, lines, and explosions are heard. Russian loyal authorities on the 8th News telegram channel, Shot, wrote that residents of Syzran report a fire in the area of the local oil refinery after the attack on the Ukrainian armed forces. As the residents of Shot said, after the series of explosions and the fire of smoke, they saw in the area of the local enterprise, Perdiekno. On the night of August 14, at least 8 UAVs attacked the territory of the local Volgograd plant Neftoporobatka in the Krasnoarmyatsky district of Volgograd, and now the known details of this attack became known. According to the sources of Astra, 2 pipeline and a reservoir. Primary oil processing units are on fire. The railway caravan also set sail. The plant's work was temporarily suspended. Earlier, the General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces confirmed the attack on the refinery. Before that, the governor of Volgograd Oblast reported that a refinery was attacked in the capital of the region. Oil products are poured and burned. Ulukoil Volgograd Neftoporobatka is the largest oil processing plant in the Volgograd Oblast and is one of the key assets of Ulukoil. The plant produces more than 15 million tons of oil every year. The plant specializes in deeply refining oil, the production of gasoline, diesel avionic fuel, nitrogen, bitumen, and other oil products. Before that, Ulukoil refineries in Volgograd have already been attacked by drones many times. In general, the last weeks have been characterized by incredibly intensive strikes on Russian refineries and effective strikes. This is already either the 5th or the 6th, I count on Monday. All this is dependent on, in turn, the crisis of the refinery's oil processing and exacerbates the situation for Russian fuel opportunities, and the budget also. The evening of August 12, Ukrainian armed forces carried out about 6 strikes with mechanized missiles and several strikes with UAVs on the oil pump station Unech in the Bryansk region. According to one Astra source in the electric service of the region, 2 pump stations burned out, but provide oil pumped in the Leningrad region Ust-Luga. There was a fire in the building of the repair workshop. The roof of one of the oil reservoirs burned out. Also, during the attack, the pipeline was damaged, as a result of which the oil refineries in fire, the oil products, and the fire. 7 people were evacuated from the station. When the fire broke out, he suffered a serious burns. Earlier, Ukrainian intelligence confirmed a drone attack on the oil pump from the Unech station. Operation Gore and Ministry of Defense of Ukraine were carried out together with the units of the Defense Force, reported Suspilny sources. According to the publication, Unech is the largest oil supply unit Druzhba, which provides the Russian defense industry. Earlier, Astra, with a reference to local residents, reported that UAVs attacked the line production dispatch station Unech in the village of Vysokaya in the Unech area. Drones were already hit there on August 6, Astra found out. The consequences of the attack of Unech by Unech were also confirmed by the General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces. But in the fuel infrastructure, everything is not limited. More than 2,000 square meters of production areas are damaged at the instrument-making plant in Arzamas as a result of a UAV attack. On June 11, Ukrainian drones hit the Arzamas instrument-making plant Plandin in the Nizhny Novgorod region. According to Astra sources in the actual services of the region, at least 2 drones hit the roof of the first core, where the construction of electronic equipment was taking place. Another unit hit the shelter in the third core, where a mechanical building of products was taking place. The total damage in the production workshops was 2,200 SQM. The refinery is part of the Tactical Aircraft Weapons Corporation, designing and manufacturing equipment for the aviation, space, and missile sectors. In 2020, the refinery was awarded the National Golden Idea Prize in Military Technical Cooperation. The refinery is under US and EU sanctions. Ministry of Emergency Situations announced the destruction of key elements in the Ukrainian program for the creation of long-range missiles SAPSIN. According to the department, in July, the Russian armed forces delivered massive strikes on the enterprise's defense industry in Ukraine, including the Designers Bureau production. Power for the release of rocket fuel and the raising of missile arms. The confirmation of his words, the FSB even posted a whole video, but he convinced few people. In particular, this is what the neo-Nazis group DSHRG Rusich wrote. Nazis group was loudly outraged by the supposedly carried out Operation SABSAN, with no confirmation of the damage made to the right workshops where missiles were manufactured or designed. There are no name of the eliminated science employees developing these missiles, and only Kremlin scumbags like clowns from the Mayor General channel can now scream about the operation. In fact, the spider web operation, which the whole world saw, cannot be compared even close, and here we can judge about the supposedly happened only from the short video, where they do not give any specificity. The Z channels crumble. No one will believe our special services for a word for a long time. All these loud statements about thousands of destroyed mercenaries, hundreds of NATO officers, billion damaged submarines now work only on the thinking of sick and sincerely sick, writes GR. Usich. In-channel researcher Ukraine Battlemap also noted the flaws in the FSB version, noting, for example, that during the demonstration of the consequences of the strike on the Belgorod chemical plant, Ukrainian service showed signs of the strikes made in 2023. In general, of course, the FSB story looks far less convincing than the Ukrainian operation. Spider, a kind of response to which he supposedly had to speak. But still, it does not splinter my favorite operation, Retribution, which I even made a video about. When in response to the arrival of the Russian soldiers to the new year, Russia hit a random garage in the void, and Konashenko stated that 700 Ukrainian soldiers were destroyed. Apparently they are held to this plan. Much more than the mythical special operation of the Ministry of Emergency Situations, it looks like a daily Russian terror near the front areas. In the past day, in Kharkiv region, 1 person died, another was injured as a result of shelling, the local authorities reported. In the day of August 14, as a result of the shelling of the Russian armed forces in Kazikilpani, another local resident died. In Kherson region, artillery shelling of the villages of Chernivivka, Stepanovka, and Kamishny was recorded. 7 people died and another 9 were injured. During the evacuation, a Russian drone attacked a police vehicle earlier than 3 police officers. More than 100 houses in the region were damaged. In July, according to the EU, as a result of combat actions in Ukraine, 286 people died and 1,388 people were injured. This is the new NR record since May 2022. According to monitoring mission, almost all these people, 98%, were killed or injured in the territory controlled in Ukraine, meaning Russian strikes. The number of victims of long-range strikes with missiles and drones in July decreased in July compared to June, but still reached a relative majority, about 40%. At the front line and in the close rear, as observed by the UN, peaceful residents most often die or are injured from Russian bomb strikes or close-range drone strikes. Evacuation is expanding in the Pokrovsk direction, as it is now. On the Pokrovsk direction, Deep State notes the advance of Russian armed forces near Poltavka on the eastern flank. Evacuation events are expanding in this area. Forced evacuation of families with children is announced in Druzhba, as well as in the villages of Andriivka, Varvarivka, Novandriivka, and Ragansk-Andriivsk community of the Donetsk region, said the local OVO. About 1,880 children live in these settlements. The enemy shoots down Donetsk region about 3,000 times daily. It is located in the region very dangerous for life, emphasized the head of the OVO, Filishkin. Russian researcher Klemen Malin draws a situation around the so-called breakthrough on Dobrapilya and trying to guess the further actions of the Ukrainian forces. Here is the thread of the researcher in the resumption of the Ukrainian channel, in Factum. Klemen Malin writes that the arrival and reinforcements to the Dobrapilya direction, including the First Corps, Azov, allowed to hold off Russian infiltration in the invasion. It was found out that it was larger than expected due to the lack of visual proofs. About 200 Russians are killed and wounded. This is too much for a separate group of infiltration, which confirms the active collection of infantry. Here the researchers have in mind the statement of the First Corps, Natsguard Azov, recently deployed to the scene of events, according to which in the last 2 days 151 Russian interceptors were eliminated, more than 70 were injured and 9 were captured. Now the most difficult work begins for Ukrainian forces to counterattack positions that used to be their own fortification. Rockle65, another Ascenter, writes that the defense forces began a local counterattack. They have not yet managed to return the Golden Kalides. At the same time, the 2nd Battalion of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade is pressing on the eastern flank. The task for the defense forces is to conduct a quite powerful counterattack to save Pokrovsk. The goal is to throw the Russian army back over the Kazan turrets. The main problem is that the Russian army has accumulated dozens of thousand people in this sector, and Ukrainian forces, already captured by the enemy of the fortification, interfere with the use of armored vehicles already by the defense forces. The defense forces need to close a breakthrough near the new Donbas defensive line. To do this, they need to return to the village of Rubishnya and make a distance quite far from the Russians. Yes, anti-tank rumble won't stop the infantry, but they also will interfere with motorcycles and armored vehicles. It must be said that the Ukrainian army is not on the verge of collapse. After the breakthrough in the direction of Dnipropetrovsk, the Russians have not been able to break into the deep as quickly as some predicted, so it's likely that Ukrainians are temporarily easing the threat. Meanwhile, satellite data shows it wasn't an easy infiltration by several Russian enemy groups. The situation is more serious than some want to admit, Infactum writes. Also, it provides very interesting material from the publication Telegraph about the tactics of Russian saboteurs' actions in Pokrovsk itself. Remember that story when 150 Russian soldiers went in? The material itself gained a scandalous popularity, because in it they showed how old men and women from local residents indicate a Ukrainian FPV drone where Russian soldiers have taken cover, and a woman even opens a drone door so that it flies into the Russian shelter. The fact is that peaceful residents and their house are seen very well in the video and can now threaten danger from Russian soldiers. Therefore, I will not show the video itself here, but at the same time, the article itself is quite interesting to bring its fragments here. The cartography that the fighters shared with the group chat of the unit shows two men in civilian clothes going out of the house in the center of Pokrovsk. Caution, these are Russians, the report says, warning the other fighters of the 25th Brigade. In the last week, Ukrainian troops deported to the city are suffering not only from Russian drone attacks, but also from infantry masked by civilian troops. Russian forces are applying this new tactic to infiltrate Pokrovsk and attack Ukrainian fighters from within. This is part of Russia's attempt to capture the city and as much as possible the territory before the peaceful negotiations between Putin and Trump. Personnel reconnaissance groups are breaking through defense units near Zaporizhzhia in the Donetsk region. Their goal is to cut off Pokrovsk and Kramatorsk and another vital fruit Donbas, which is still controlled by Ukraine. But Ukrainian fighters refuse to retreat from Pokrovsk. This is where Russian troops are hiding in civilian clothes among local residents, said Telegram author Ilya Petrino, deputy to the commander of the 25th Airborne Brigade. You saw how the Russians changed their uniforms, even in our uniforms. We find Russian military clothing in the areas where they were exactly. According to Petrino, their main goal is to attack infantry groups or easily armored vehicles and break Ukrainian logistics, gradually communicate with the locals and spread disinformation. Tell them that there are already 500 Russians in Pokrovsk to convince Ukrainians not to help. Petrino says that the wave of saboteurs entering the city began on July 18, when the bad weather limited the work of Ukrainian drone operators and allowed Russian troops to unnoticeably slip into the city. Then the saboteurs moved in groups of 3 or 4, taking abandoned houses and wearing any civilian clothes. In one case, a Russian soldier, after the last one to survive from his unit, was found in a t-shirt Ukropost. The video shows a telegram or mobile phone taken from a Russian soldier that contains the Pokrovsk map. On colorless numbers and routes, the roads are marked and safe lines are used by Russian troops to penetrate the city. We found the route through which they entered the city, says Petrina. The assault group was sent there and the entry was blocked. When Ukrainian forces moved through this route, they began to find an abandoned form in the houses. That's when we started the infiltration among the civilians, he adds. The infiltration process took 9 days. Ukrainian fighters went from house to house along routes infiltration, talking to residents to distinguish friends from enemies. In one house, they entered the fight with the Russian group. Ukrainians destroyed all the units, throwing grenades to the basement where they were hiding. Pokrovsk residents help Ukrainian forces. Identify saboteurs? In one video, 2 elderly local people are sending a Ukrainian drone to the house where Russian soldiers are hiding. However, the presence of civilized people also complicates the situation, and there are moments when Ukrainian fighters are not sure who is a friend and who is the enemy. So, Petrina recalls the case when a mystery antenna appeared on the roof of the building. Our drones began to circle around this building, thinking that the Russians would be hiding there. At first, a man came out and then he showed his wife and child. Since Ukraine does not conduct forced evacuation of residents from the outskirts, fighters are forced to constantly decide who is a civilized act and who is a masked enemy. This indecency also reduces the weapons they can use, often forcing them to rely on drones instead of artillery. It must be noted separately that changing into civilized clothing is forbidden. It is a violation of the International Convention for Waging a War. And in fact, remember how I told you that in the Kursk region, Russian soldiers also changed into civilized clothing. This is a pretty monstrous story because it is forbidden not just like that. Why is it forbidden? Because if there are proved facts and there are proved facts that the Russian army changes into civilized clothing, it means that civilized People can get under incidental fire, because it is not clear who is suddenly who, the enemy, how he behave, and so on. And this is a big problem, a monstrous problem. And in fact, it is created by the Russian army, which does not destroy anything at all. Well, in principle, it was and so clear. On the South Donetsk direction, according to Deep State, the Russian armed forces have advanced in the area of Sychnevo and Malinovka. The Russian offensive here continues, although it no longer has such a catastrophic nature as literally several weeks ago. Of course, the situation can change. For example, if the Ukrainian command will have to redeploy units from this sector to eliminate the crisis in the Pokrovsk region or some other direction, which the Russians will not have to use, as many analysts fear. The Russians bypass Chasiv Yar from the north in addition to Chasiv Yar, which they have not captured yet. Deep State reports on the advance of Russian armed forces in the area of Mayskiv to the north of Chasiv Yar. Apparently, regretting knocking out the fighters of the Ukrainian Defense Force from the city, recently heroically taken in the Telegram channel of the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Russian command decided to try to bypass the city and cut the logistics of the Ukrainian defenders by the already worked-out scheme. It remains to be hoped that the scheme will not work, because behind Chasiv Yar the Russian troops are open the path to Konstantinovka, Druzhba, and Kramatorsk. As for the Zaporizhzhia region, according to Deep State, at the junction of the Zaporizhzhia and South Donetsk directions, the Russian troops advanced in the area of Malinovka. In the same direction, another Russian mechanized assault was reflected, the in factum reports. The 118th Mechanized Brigade, the channel reports, reflected the mechanized assault of the enemy in the direction of Malaya Takmachka in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Russian armored group began moving from Zverbovova to heavy armored vehicles, for which the assault bikers followed. Through the fields, the group reached Novopokrovka and the highway T0815, which was to enter Malaya Takmachka. The assault failed. The Russians lost a tank of 4 buggy, 4 motorcycles, several BMT and BTR. It is noticeable that a significant part of the work was done by mines, distance installed on potential routes. Ukrainian operators mostly aimed at using unmanned vehicles and infantry meeting with it. Russia and Ukraine carried out another exchange of prisoners, which was different in the fact that more civilized prisoners returned to Ukraine than military prisoners, and many of them held out. Until the full-scale invasion began, 51 civilized prisoners and 33 military prisoners returned from the Russian captivity, according to the traditional staff. Civilized and military Ukrainians who were illegally condemned to live in the Russian military for long terms. 3 women from Donetsk and Lugansk regions, including one of them is a teacher of an initial school, were returned to Ukraine. 2 pairs of real sisters were also released who have been held in captivity since March and April 2022. The youngest is 26 years old, the oldest is 74, from which he has been in Russian captivity for the past 7 years. Among those who returned to Russia, more than half of them were held in captivity in 2024, 51%. However, there were those who were held in captivity since 2023, 26%. Insider reported on this project, I want to find. The longer today's exchange was expected by the prisoners of war who were held in captivity since March 2022 in the Nikolaevskaya region. Thus, on the 1261st day, he waited for Russia to include him on the list for exchange. Mainly soldiers who were held in captivity in Kursk, 32%, Zaporizhzhia, 29%, and Donetsk regions, 20%. New report on how the Russian army refers to its own soldier. In his message, the serviceman said he has been at the SVO for a year now, has been wounded 3 times, and is currently undergoing treatment after the last one. According to him, no training or combat coordination was provided, and he was immediately sent to the front. That person who was handed a rifle said, "Well, you will learn there. You were the head of the headquarters. I don't remember what his name was. Well, it's like a rat if I'm not mistaken." The serviceman emphasized that his documents were lost several times. Despite the need for medical care, he was sent on combat missions. Now I have all this complication. Neuropathy, well, also the purchased hepatitis C, all the menopause. Everyone closed their eyes to this, and everyone sent us to see the combat. I can specifically see command that, well, these people are kind of not quite healthy, not treated. They close their eyes to this and say, "Guys, I do not send you to death, I just fulfill my order." The soldier is outraged that in order to confirm his 3rd wound, he was required to test it, despite the fact that he was left alone at that time. I don't know where this feeling came from, but in principle, it has been accompanied by the fact that they want to kill me simply stupidly. Rubric Elite of Russia. As Astra found out, Vynesisky plans to stop the criminal case of Beep of the girl. The reason, the suspect is already dead in the war. The beep occurred in 2021. Then, according to the victim's side, the 17-year-old at that time, Marat Hafarov, raped his 2-year-old sister, who at that time was not even 14. The girl and her relatives decided to punish the guilty only now, and a criminal case of beep was initiated. Now the case is planned to be closed since Hafarov, according to open data, died taking part in the invasion of Ukraine in 2024. And you know what is more interesting? There are more and more killers in Russia from the front, and there are much fewer police officers. And Z channels rubble about this. Ivan Filippov notes, military authors discusses poor wage and the coveted life of Russian law enforcement. The reason is the video on which the girl calls the police and she says that there are no police stupidity. Also, the unit of police is needed now. I don't have a police unit. What will happen in the evening? What do you mean there is not a single operator now? There is no current moment. Yes, there is no. That is, there is no operator for 12 days? Yes, no, everyone is fired. There is no. There can be no such thing. You are the police. You are the police. Yes, there is no police. Everything is over. Everything is over. Everything is over. It can be difficult. We have more than half of the equipment. Can you hear me? I hear, but here a specific case, a specific person can be taken. We have 16 people on the street. Everything does not work. Only one. Can you understand? No, I do not see what is going on there, only that it is not there. Colleagues discussed the shocking video from Ekaterinburg where a girl called the department and they briefly explained that they could not do anything because there are no people. According to recent data, the Ministry of Emergency Situations consists of more than 170,000 people, writes Kirill Fedorov. Listen, the police are over. It did not take long before the full collapse, or, as I said, in an immediate order, they will begin to call on yesterday's migrants, which will also lead to terrible consequences for the local people. Why do they leave the Ministry of Emergency Situations? Because of the poor pay, not provided with housing, wild processing, orders from the unit or the one above, what to do, what to release on the breaks. The current system is sluggish and to everyone except for the own oligarchic sprut, writes Russian military Ivan Atrakovsky. The key problem of their set in the Ministry of Defense is money. Everything else is more likely secondary. As real practice shows, for good money, people do not mind writing in even in the assault unit on the SVO, where the chance to die or to receive a bribe is not, for example, higher than to serve the police. Therefore, as soon as in the system of Ministry of Defense adjacent to them from power structures they will start pay decent payments, there will immediately appear a flow of those who want and competition between them, which means the opportunity to take away the system of more qualified employees. And for decent money, people will be ready to work even with senseless bureaucracy and self-love. How are they ready to fight during these same threats? Well, it's obvious that now the state's priorities are completely different. Only in the future this will create many problems, writes the military awareness. Everyone says that they are tired because the more the control system falls into loyalty and not into professionalism. You are not respected by those who surround you as an unjustified and unloved person, and the opinion of the headman can be respected. Even if you are a professional, they drive you away when they boast and award stupid policies. They ask you for a real result, bury it with more and more paper, and for that you receive a pay lower than almost everyone with responsibility for each of them, writes Roman Alyakhin. Problem is not only in the payments. Even if a conditional courier and the state officer of the Ministry of Defense received the same, there are nuances. The courier wanted to have a kebab outside the city, so he went. The officer of the Ministry of Defense wanted it, but dreaming is not harmful. Write a report for you outside the garrison. But be careful, if reinforced, everything is decided individually, and this concerns any movements, whether it be vacation or personal matters, the Belarusian law enforcement notes. We report, as soon as the position of the Supreme Order is cancelled, restriction of dismissal from the troops, and most importantly, the departments where the employees are serving, a huge number of people will leave with the service. They have been sitting without contracts for years. The reasons are not only money, but also bureaucracy, self-love, discreditation of awards for awarding them to police officers, and most importantly, often the replacement for real work by real powerhouse, paper crap and reports, slides, reports form, and endless meetings. The problem, in our opinion, is dying down, and the very high up are going through the most beautiful reports, write the two majors. All your described reasons why people run from the police, get fired, or just don't come to work mean a terrible thing. The system has created an ideal food volume for the spread of corruption basement, which the doctor prescribed for the third world countries, which, even under conditions, people, resources, and the geographical situation stagnates or lies on the outskirts of civilization. Technology has been worked on another way, and I can't explain the pitiful situation of our police, writes the Z channel Russian Tarantas. Police is the first thing that vanishes from the street at once after the start of the confusion, no matter in what half-moving planet and on what river from Venezuela to Caria or San Francisco. And the confused pairs remain the only ones with their problems. Now our streets are removing the police. They have already removed almost, writes Zerglia. But the perspective of the streets filled with killers with complete silence from the police does not look the best, but it is inevitable. Another price for the Russians for this war. I have talked many times and repeat again. This is a criminal war not in the interests of Russia and the Russians. Even if they shout Goid and pray for Putin, it will not save them from the past of a drinking special military officer with a knife. Michael Nacke was with you and see you soon. All the best, bye.